From this point onward, Rome concentrated on shoring up her empire. The days of conquest were over. It was the Emperor Hadrian who formalized this policy.
Hadrian gets a sense of unease that he has pushed the empire out to its limits, and he did two things. He pulled he pulled the army back from its overextension, and then he built a series of beautifully engineered fortifications.
The most famous of these barriers is Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, where remains of the 73-mile-long chain of forts still stand nearly 2,000 years later. But walls proved only partially successful against a threat that would torment the Roman Empire until the very end. The Romans have a word for all peoples without a written language. They call them barbarians. No one knows exactly why they began to pour into Southern Europe during the 2nd century AD. Perhaps climate changes or population growth. Perhaps the lure of the empire itself brought tribe after tribe in Rome. Little by little, pressure mounted on every frontier. When German tribes attacked Rome's borders in 166 AD, it marked a bleak milestone. For the first time since Hannibal's invasion, the Roman Empire was on the defensive. For the next century, wave after wave of migrating peoples followed the Germans into Roman territory. Goths, Franks, Persians, Parthians, Visigoths, and more. And the edges of the empire would crumble until there was no more Roman Empire to penetrate. The dam had sprung not one, but 1,000 leaks. And by the 3rd century AD, barbarians were only one of the empire's mounting crises. It was a time when an emperor was far more likely to be assassinated than die of old age, and rulers frequently left no clear successor to the throne. Once again, the affections of the individual legions became central to political power.
There came a point where the loyalty of the army became suspect, particularly in the 3rd century AD, when the empire, faced by barbarian incursions on the frontiers, faced by plague, by rampant inflation, some armies proclaimed their own commanders emperor and then marched on Rome, trying to seize power.
It was a recipe for anarchy and disaster. Feuding legions proclaimed 30 different emperors in a period of just 23 years. Civil wars broke out frequently over who the true emperor was.
Throughout much of the 3rd century, Roman armies were often engaged in fighting one another rather than in guarding the frontiers and protecting the security of the empire as a whole.
The period of the so-called barracks emperors, the period of military anarchy, is a very interesting period to modern scholars, because I think what it shows is moral collapse of the military leadership in the Roman Empire. And it's a question of allegiance. If the army becomes more important than the state, then ultimately both the army and the state are doomed.
Meanwhile, Rome's impressive record in battle was slipping. Apparently, the great legions had lost their edge. The low point came in 260 AD. The Emperor Valerian has spent his entire career fighting the Persians to the east with limited success. With his troops ravaged by war and disease, he's forced to do something no emperor has ever done: negotiate. But when Valerian arrives in modern-day Iraq to talk peace, he's taken prisoner. The emperor of the Roman Empire is made to kneel down on the ground before his conquerors, so the Persian king Shapur can step on his neck. It's a devastating blow to Roman pride. It was not the end for Rome, not yet. But it was the beginning of the end. The Roman legions were no longer the invincible fighting machine that once conquered the world. The frontiers of the empire were no longer impenetrable. And Rome herself could no longer be said to rule the world. Less than a century after the first barbarians crossed into the empire, one ancient Roman saw this momentous time for what it was.
Our history now plunges from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust.
Stay tuned. Follow-up questions, activities, and resources are up next on Assignment Discovery. Now that you've seen Ancient Rome, Expansion and Conquest Part 2, talk about this.